see here. Make sure we got this thing rolling correctly. Go to, oh, not there. I want to go to the Creator Studio. Let's see. I'm actually interested to see if anybody joins the live stream. Yeah. Sweet, I think we're good. Yeah, looks like we're rolling. So I've been listening to the podcast and sort of I went back and listened to some of the previous episodes and realized that I had a lot more to say and that I wanted to come back. Now, a couple of things you'll notice. First of all, I've changed the name of the podcast. In fact, I probably should change the name of the live stream. Let's do that right now. I don't know if that's going to change the actual live stream, but anyway, I realized there's a lot of stuff that sort of got left unsaid. And listening back over, it's actually kind of weird that I would go back and listen to my own podcast, I guess. Maybe not. I don't know. I think I might just be a little bit crazy. But I thought it was interesting, at least, going back and listening to some of the things that I had said. Some of the things that were, oh yeah, it did change. Did it? I don't know if it did. Anyway, we'll get rid of that. Just a lot of things a lot of things have happened, and I think there's just more to say, more thoughts that I have, and so I just wanted to share them. And so, of course, the format comes back to, this is what I meant to say. So I changed the name of the podcast because the La Podcast was just something I came up with sort of off the cuff and didn't really mean anything. And so I changed the name of the podcast to Think Like Me or Don't. And the idea behind that is some people think like I do. Some people don't think like I do. And it doesn't really matter, I don't think, whether you do or don't. The important thing, I think, is that there's a free flow of ideas and of thoughts, and so that's kind of where that comes from. But as usual, I mean, my everything that I have to say comes back to several specific points, and I think a lot about these things. I went back and listened to the episode where I talked about leaving the church, which was episode 3, and it reminded me of a lot of thoughts that I have, a lot of things I haven't even thought about in the last little while, which has been really interesting. That being a core tenet part of my life, of my previous life, and since it's not that big a part of my life anymore. And then, just thinking back and listening to some of the episodes where I was doing music stuff. And so I got the piano here with me. At one of these episodes, I'm going to install the guitar back again, and we'll use that as well. But, for now, just wanted to jump back in and talk. I actually recorded a YouTube video the other day, just while I was walking. And interestingly enough, I think that, what I said in that video, I think that was like version 1 of the thought, and there's a lot of hang on, YouTube is telling me to change some settings. Okay, bear with me for a second. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so we'll go to settings, stream. I can do this, right? In the middle of the thing? Oh, maybe not. Let's see. Advanced? No. Video. Yeah, I don't even know how to change that, so. How do I do keyframes? No idea, but let's kill this. We'll start it over again. See what that is. Okay. We're going to start that whole thing over, since nobody actually saw the first one anyway. I think I got the keyframe stuff right, which we'll see. We'll see if YouTube freaks out on me. Oh, I think this is continued stream from the last one. Oh, perfect. So I don't have to redo all that stuff. Awesome. Yeah, I just changed the keyframe rate. I don't even know what that means, but we'll see if it changes. This is what happens when I don't have somebody to run this stuff for me, which I don't know that I ever will. Not that it really matters. But anyway, going back to some of the things that have happened that sort of changed the way that you're thinking. Like I was saying, I made this YouTube video the other day, and was talking about preparation and training, and it was talking specifically about training for a much worse situation than you actually expect to be in. And I thought that's super interesting, because I think that I personally have just been behind in this concept, because it's not a foreign concept. It's not really that strange of a concept. The idea that when you train or when you practice for something, you practice for worse than what the performance is actually going to be. So, for example, like on the piano, there's lots of pieces that I've played that I couldn't play now. And part of the reason for that is because I didn't, when I trained for them and when I practiced for them, I practiced to be able to play it right once or twice in rehearsal, and never really to play it perfectly and have it totally memorized. So there are very few songs outside the songs that I wrote myself. I mean, obviously some of the stuff that I wrote myself I can remember because they came from me. But a lot of the other songs that are really cool, I don't remember. I remember pieces of them, like this one. I don't even know if my fingers are going to remember it. Yeah, that's all I remember. And it's interesting because I love that song, but I didn't practice hard enough when I was learning it to be able to pull it out at any moment, right? And so there's lots of different pieces like that where, you learn it. And when I practice, and this still happens, practice to the point where I can play it right, at least like without making any major mistakes, like once or twice, and then consider myself practiced, and that was enough. And I think, in general, that's the problem with that attitude, is that it sets you up for too much potential variance in the performance itself. And I think that's something I think the reason why it never really hit home for me was because I didn't ever consider that a perfect performance was possible, right? So there was always anxiety around performing, but the anxiety was because I didn't put the time in to actually learn what it was that I was trying to learn and well enough so that performing it wasn't like, there was no way that it would be not perfect, if that makes sense. So, so I think I've always had this negative view or unhealthy, I should say, view on performing, because it never really, I never really like internalized the idea that you can practice hard enough to where performing perfectly is not, it's not even a question. Like it will happen simply because, that's the way that it is, right? It's not like it's a question. I feel like I'm belaboring this point, but the idea is, if you actually work hard enough in practice and in training, and I'll get in a second to the training, how this applies to training and like fighting and things, but if you work hard enough in practice, like on the piano, then you'll never, then your fingers will just do, like what I just played, this right here. That I can play perfectly, and that's the opening line, the opening sequence for a Dave Grusin song. It comes from the movie The Firm with Tom Cruise. Great movie, and Dave Grusin actually plays the piano. Is the entire soundtrack is just him playing on the piano, and most of that song, like he wrote the theme, this part. It happens, that's basically the whole song. And then he just riffs off of that. So he goes into that, and there's a B section where it goes something like this. And I forget how it goes, but it's like that little section, and then there's another part where he plays down lower. And one of these days I'll actually learn it, and then I'll perform it for you on one of these live things, but it's not going to happen now. But the point that I was getting to is I know that sequence for two reasons. Number one, because it's one of my favorite parts of the song, so I played it a lot. But number two, it's the first part of the song. So when I'd sit down to practice, I would practice that part first because that's the beginning of the song. So I do. You can tell there are certain parts that I didn't practice perfectly, like that intro, this part. Right. But that part I learned, and I can play that part at any point. And sometimes what I'll do to play off like I remember the song is I'll just riff on that that part, because I know this part goes. Like I remember certain parts of it. And so I'll dig back into that and remember, those pieces in that spot. But I can't do the whole thing. And in fact, that's not how that part goes. That's taking pieces from the first, like the middle and the different parts of the song. And, it's just because I never put the time in, never really focused my energies on that enough to be able to say, yeah, I can play this song perfectly. And it's not that I haven't put hours in practicing the song. I mean, I was first introduced to that song in high school, my senior year of high school, and have essentially been trying to play it ever since. And I've never really sat down and put the real work in to practice each of the pieces, like each of the individual parts, so that I could play it all perfectly. There's the same thing with Clair de Lune by Debussy. There's pieces of that song that if I sat down, and even if I'm playing through with sheet music, like I'd have to get into it, but there are certain pieces that I practiced and that I learned correctly. So like, something I obviously I can't play it. I have the sheet music over here. I probably should pull it out at some point, but there's one part that I have to get into with the music, but when I get to that point, I can stop. I can not look at the music and just play it because I know where it's at. It's because those pieces I actually practiced because I wanted those to be right. Whereas the rest of it, I relied on the music very heavily, and I think part of that comes from. I've always had this ability, and I everything as far as this stuff is concerned relates back to music, because I've always had this ability to sight read. And that just basically means I can sit down. In fact, there's a piece of music in front of me here. It's super tiny, so I don't really know what's going on here. But the idea here is I can just sit here and let's see. This is all the flats, so this is going to be terrible. And I can like figure it out as I go. So I just see the notes and I understand the way the notes work and I know how songs flow together. So I have a general understanding in my head. And so I've always been really, really good at being able to sit down and just sort of make it up, like just flow through it and try and make it happen. But the problem is that I've never taken that and shut that part off to then go and actually practice, because the juxtaposition of like the flip side of the coin, so to speak, from being able to play something to sight read something is having to practice it and having to learn it. So I could sit down and, in fact, bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to go get some music. I'm going to show you what I mean by this. All right, so the idea here is, I'm going to put this is Debussy, however you pronounce it. I still don't know how to pronounce it. That's pretty ridiculous. But if I go to, let's find that song, Claire de Lune. I don't even know where it is in here. I know it's in here. That's why I bought this book. Oh, there we go, 198. Okay, so if we're sitting here, all right. So this is this song, and now that I have the music, what's going to happen right now is I've played this song before, so this isn't really sight reading, but I haven't played it in long enough to where it's kind of is like sight reading. And in a second, I'll show you real sight reading where I've never actually seen the song before, and then I'll talk about what that means. But so this is this song. Ready? Oops. See, this is the problem, is sometimes I don't remember right. So here we go. Let's try it again. See, even right there. I know those notes. I know exactly how it's supposed to go, but because I could sight read through it when I would do it before, I never actually had to like purposely get my fingers to do the right thing. Now let me show you that spot right here. So it was at a page turn. So it's a page turn no matter what music you're using. This page turn here, this part right here. I'm doing a terrible job of showing that I knew how to play it, but there's this part right here that I could always play, but I was almost always sight reading through the whole thing because I never really would sit down and actually teach my fingers to know the pieces. And interestingly enough, there's a lot about music. I think deep down I had I didn't want this to be I didn't want my performances or anything that I did musically to be rote. I wanted it to be heartfelt. And so for me, I think that turned me off to the idea of really practicing, because this is what it comes down to. Piano is mechanics. It's fingers and they play notes, but it's just the mechanics of putting your fingers in the right place and then pushing down. That's really all that it is. And even the emotion that you put into playing, like for example, listen to the difference between these two. So this first version is, so just listen. This is technically the way that this is the notes, right? Right, you can hear. So you heard that, right? That's the notes being played. This is the same notes, the same rhythm, the same everything. This is that emotion that's put on the top of it, right? Right. You can hear the difference. And I think in my head, this is me deconstructing my high school self, but in my head, that emotion that was put on, I felt like had to be put on in the moment. Like that wasn't something that I could put on as part of practicing and then have that come out in the performance. Like I didn't want to create too much, what's the word? I didn't want it to be too canned. Like I didn't want to practice the emotion. I just wanted the emotion to come out. I wanted that to be very real and very, very honest. And so I think there was a part of me that in order to preserve that, refused to put in the time to really practice and perfect the actual piece. There's a lot of P's there because I was about to say for the performance, which would have made it like 5 P's. And I think it was a mistake because in my naive high school age mind, I think I thought I was conflating something that was practiced with something that was honest. Because I think that it's not difficult to when you have a feeling for, and this is going to speak mostly to my musician friends or anybody that's done music before. When you understand the structure, the skeleton, so to speak, of the music that you're dealing with, adding the emotion into that is not something that's difficult for someone who understands emoting through music, which is something that I've always been able to do. But I like I said, I feel like it's been at the detriment of actually learning the notes, because then the emotion can come on top of it. So I had various, I was in various choirs and in various ensembles, and there were some instances where the director or the person that was in charge would remove all emotion from the story until the notes were perfect. Everything is technically perfect, and then we add emotion in. Whereas some other people that I respected equally as much would say, no, you can't ever take the emotion out of it because it has to be part of the performance, right? And so I think I never really committed one way or the other. But one thing I for sure didn't do was commit to actually learning the notes and actually committing to like learning the piece so that I could perform it. You know what I mean? So I would, like I said, I got to the point where I'm really good at just sight reading. So for example, Actually, no, we'll go to Beethoven. We'll pull up some Beethoven that I've never played before. Okay, Sonata in G minor. Don't even know the song, although I'll probably recognize it once I get going into it. But the idea basically is, and of course I've put myself into a box here because if I can't play this, then I look like an idiot. But the idea basically is I've always been able to kind of sit down and within a couple of minutes just be able to play it. So let's just deal with the first line here. So about 60, okay. Two. Yep. Right, so the idea, I bet at home you're probably thinking, there is no way that's the right thing. That actually isn't far off. I think probably the timing is off, and if I had heard it before, that would make a difference to proving the point of me being able to just sort of stick in and just play it. Here, let's see if we can find another one. Here's a good one. Let's see, Sonatina in F major. So let's see how this one goes. Oh, the wrong key. Anyway, you get the idea, right? It's not super difficult, and the thing is that's not performance ready, but I could always sit down and figure it out. You know, I could pick a song, Sonatina in a Sonata in G major, right? So. Oh, wrong key. Right. So the idea being, this is like a terrible rendition of me sight reading because I'm not actually doing a very good job. Part of that's because I haven't actually played the piano in like 6 months. But the idea is I've always been able to just pick things up and play. And that I think has caused my ability or my desire, or really just that whatever it is that causes somebody to go and really dig in and practice something. There's like no reason for it. Like, why would I go do that? Because I can, just as easily sit down and just pick something up and play it. So here's another good example of that. So this is from the Firm, that song I was telling you before. So the sheet music is actually here. So what I've always been able to do is if I can sit down with the music itself. Now this is a different story. All right, so I showed you before how I remember pieces of it, but I can't play the whole thing, right? So let's see how this goes. It's going to be a little bit different. obviously playing the actual notes is an issue. That's because I haven't practiced in a while. But the idea, you can already hear the difference, and that's that I'm actually playing the right notes. So. So he plays that part, and then he goes into this. Right. So at that point, you notice, I can't remember those notes, but you see, I played that part pretty much perfectly, and it's just because that's one thing that I actually did practice, right? And there's some parts in here, right, that I just know that I can play, and then we get down into this part. Now, this is very, very interesting. Because since the very beginning, I've had a knack, again, this goes back into sight reading. I've had a knack for being able to sight read rhythms and just understand how the right and left hand play back and forth as I'm reading it, and I can't really explain it. But this part here that he gets into, right, this whole part in here that he gets into this little like back and forth with the low. Right, that whole section, I never learned. And the reason why is because every time I sit down to play it, I could read the music. And so I would sit down and I would sight read every single time as though it was the first time that I'd seen it. Now, the difference was I knew where it was going. I knew where it was ending up, but I never really internalized that. I could never sit down and like to this day, even now that I've got it, if I remember that I'd seen it, I couldn't sit down and like just play that part because I don't know it, because I never learned it, because I could always just pick it up and sight read it. And so I never really got to the point where I was learning deep enough to be able to perform some of those things. And I think the point that I'm getting at here is not so much the sight reading versus the performing. I think it's more relying on what I'll call false positives in your ability to perform. So, like, another really good example is all through high school and all through college, I never studied. I was not a studier. I was not a homework doer. I was not a studier, much to the chagrin of both my parents and anybody who really cared about what my future held for me. But I didn't care, and the reason was because when it came down to it, I was good enough at taking tests because I was good at knowing how tests work. So you go in and take a test, and tests in high school specifically, but even some of the college courses that I took, tests are less about understanding material and more about understanding the professor, and understanding the types of questions that are going to be asked, like the teacher, and understanding what types of questions. Because I mean, if it's a multiple choice test, it's not about material. It's about understanding the way that those tests are put together. Every teacher, people just don't have enough time. This, by the way, this is probably going to turn into a how to cheat, like how to beat your tests little thing. But in any test that I ever took, teachers don't have the time or the patience to really think about the answers that they provide. And so usually almost 100% of the time, for every test that you take, there's an answer that's absolutely wrong, and there's an answer that's close but not quite there. So there's usually two that you can discount right away, and then it's between one or the other. And it's really just about doing enough of the work to get to the answer to point you in one or the other direction. Because for me, I got to the point where taking tests was about finishing tests. Like, how fast can I finish this test? It wasn't about, did I learn the material? It was about how quickly can I be done with this and on to the next thing. And usually, and stupidly, that usually meant sitting and waiting for the end of the test. But like in college, once I was done with the test, I could leave. And for me, getting a B minus or even a C plus on a test was enough of I was willing to pay that in order to not have to sit in that testing center for any longer, which was, I think, kind of dumb. But I think it goes back to the same idea with sight reading versus actually learning it, is that I was able to get by because I understood the game. I understood how everything is actually supposed to work. And so I would understand that, just like here, if I can sit down with music and sight read it, what I'm getting, because I wasn't really performing that often, but what I'm getting is anybody who's around me who's listening is taking enjoyment from what I'm playing, and they don't know the difference because I'm not really performing at a high level with people that actually know the difference. It doesn't really matter how, whether it's perfect or not. And so, because I didn't really elevate my game and I wasn't really trying to at its core, I wasn't really trying to improve the craft. I was more just, dinking around, so to speak. The same thing rolled over into test taking in high school and in college. It wasn't that I didn't learn anything, because there were some classes that I was really interested in and I would actually pay attention to. And there are some things that I did learn. But the problem is that and I said this in the video that I recorded the other day, I mean, from high school and college, there's like 3 or 4 things that I remember learning from classes. There were things that I picked up, sort of, side things that I learned about myself and things I learned about, test taking and other people. But as far as like principles that I learned from the classes that I took, there was very, very little that I actually learned. And I think that goes back to my inability and my lack of desire, so to speak, to actually learn the material, but rather to be present and just, I didn't ever want to take my eye off of what was happening around me. I think is what it comes down to, which I don't really know if that's just me trying to put my finger on something. But it's interesting because that it came, I would never have thought about this. I never would have even considered, making this into either a podcast episode or anything that I was even thinking about, except it came up, the same idea came up in training, right? So as I realized it's funny that it took me this long, but a couple of months ago, so first of all, a little bit of backstory. So I started training Muay Thai in October of 2014. Okay, so long time ago. In February of 2016, I fought for the first time. It was like a smoker IKF point style Muay Thai. So it wasn't really like, it had gear on, 16-ounce gloves. It was like hard sparring, essentially. Fought for the first time, and then fought again about 10 months later in November of that year. Same style thing, it was like a smoker type thing. And then in May of the next year, I fought at a tournament in Arizona, and that was sanctioned. So it was 12-ounce gloves, I think, and elbows, but we still wore shin guards and headgear. And those were a little bit more intense. I got hit a little bit harder for those fights. But I remember recently, since probably May, actually probably since the last 2 fights that I took a job. There's a lot of stuff that's gone into that, which I'll make another episode telling all about what's happened the last several months, because it's kind of fun and it involves where we are now pretty heavily. But what I've noticed as I've taken time off and not been as intensely into training is a couple of things. First of all, I've noticed that just like before, I was falling into some of the similar tendencies where I find myself not wanting to go take classes because I just want to go spar. And I think part of that is because I think that I'm good enough to where I don't need those classes, or I don't want to. They bore me in the same way that going to class in high school or in college or doing homework would bore me. And interestingly enough, I watched video of myself sparring 3 weeks ago, and I think that's what got this whole thought process started, because I saw footage of myself, and I was like, that guy does not know what he's doing. Like I stepped outside of myself, and I was actually watching myself as a viewer. I wasn't I wasn't reliving the situation. I was a third party, a bystander. I was actually watching myself and judging myself, which I do. And it occurred to me, there are so many, I do okay when I spar. Okay. I have a decent amount of skill. I'm not anything, spectacular by any means. I'm a solid member of the team, and I come and I help people out, and I can give people a good look is the term that we use. I do a good job. But when I watch myself, I notice that I don't, my hands are here. And when I defend, I have this weird, like I don't really defend, not really with any strength, with any vigor. I sort of defend and I shell up, and then when it's my time to go, then I'll, then I'll return. There's just a lot of these little mistakes that I continue to make. That it's not even necessarily that they're mistakes. It's just I'm performing at lower than the level that I want to be performing at, and I can see it now because I've watched myself do it, and so now I can see the difference, and I realize that my first of all, taking time off and not training, not I'm getting a little bit bigger. I wore this black shirt today on purpose, by the way, because I didn't want you to notice as blatantly how much in the midsection I've put on. I wanted to, well, I realized that, I wasn't as, well, to put it bluntly, I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And I think it comes down to that fact that I've stepped out and I thought I was better than I actually was. And I thought I could step away from the training aspect. And I realized that there are so many, like I'm a beginner at everything that I'm doing. The only reason that I'm any better than anybody else at Muay Thai is simply that I'm a beginner at everything, as opposed to being a beginner and I've never even tried some of those other things. There's just there's some things that I can do. There's a lot of things that I can't, and most things I can do. I can't do anything really well. And it's interesting because I can step in and I can spar, but then I have to think about who I'm sparring against. And this is not to discount, not to down talk or anything, the people that I train with, because they're amazing. It's just they're all smaller than I am. They're all little guys. I outweigh every single person that I train with a couple of exceptions, but they don't come to sparring as much. But I outweigh everybody by at least 30 pounds. And I have about a 6 to 7 inch reach advantage. So for me to say that I do okay when sparring is not saying much, because of course I should be doing okay. I'm bigger than everybody else, right? I have the reach advantage. I have the weight advantage. I just have to throw something and it's going to knock them off balance, right? And so now looking back with that lens, like it all came clear to me when I saw myself and I was like, this guy's not as good as he thinks he is. It all became clear to me, and I went back and started to think about, oh yeah, you do well, but you get caught with stuff. I get caught to the body, which, to explain, I'm a really tall guy, and to let somebody get to my body and actually be throwing significant shot, like punches to my body, means that I'm letting people in, which is that's not to say that, that should never ever happen, but it happens more often than it should. That shouldn't be something that I'm really dealing with very often. It should be more the longer techniques that people are getting in on me, or people should be moving a lot quicker than they actually are. And so it's interesting because, you start to realize that, I've become comfortable with where I am and with what the performance that I'm actually giving. So it clicked for me, and I went back to this idea of when I sit down to play the piano, I can sight read just about anything. So I don't really have to be that good. I don't have to remember anything. It just give me some sheet music and I'll figure it out, and I'll leave half the notes out, but it'll sound okay. Now, anybody who knows anything about music that comes in will pick up on it right away. They'll see me as, well, he's just kind of faking it around. Now, I'm okay. Like I'm pretty good at the piano. And being able to sight read like that is a skill. But in the same way that, like, being able to spar, but not really being able to improve your game. Like if I was to fight against somebody, or even spar against somebody that was my weight, it's a totally different game. and I feel a lot less confident in myself because I'm sparring at the level that I should be sparring at, as opposed to this sort of lesser level. So in the same way, the whole point that I'm getting at is, if I had taken piano, if I was to take piano seriously and practice as though it was a real performance, and at the level that I need to in order to perform like perfectly, if I was practicing so that professional piano players would be impressed by what I was doing, then everything that I did would be, my fingers would be a lot crisper. I could be confident in them. And like what I was saying at the beginning, the confidence in the performance, there would be no question about whether or not I can perform the piece correctly. Because I would, like, if I sat down in front of people, like, I'll say lay people that aren't musicians, or people that aren't pianists, but they appreciate music, it would be perfect, even in their eyes. Whereas some of the stuff that I'm doing now, I can kind of get by, and even though it's not perfect, they may hear a mistake or two, but they don't really care. Whereas if I was practicing this so that I could perform in front of professional musicians and real judges that really know what they're talking about, it would change the game. I would be at a whole different level here. And I think the same thing is true if I was to go back to school now and perform, practice, meaning study and do homework, not so that I can pass a class, and not with the understanding that I know the teacher, I know the professor, and so I can sort of fudge my way along, but rather do it so that I can perform correctly and adequately on the test and ace the test 100%. Because there's a difference between being okay with a B and holding yourself to and expecting yourself to perform perfectly. Because you might understand this. When you go to take a test, if you are okay with a B, then the preparation means that you don't really need to know everything that could be on the test. You really just need to know enough. So you need to test to like a B level. You need to be like, I know most of the stuff and I'm okay and it's fine. The only way you get 100% is either through dumb luck, which you can't sustain, or because you know more than you know everything that could possibly be covered on the test. So it's not just like what I would do in college is my professors would always give us study guides that would say, this is the stuff you need to know on the test. And I'd always get frustrated because there'd be questions that weren't on the study guide. And it would be like, well, this is what you told us to study. And it's like, these are the types of things that you should know. But everything from this quarter that we're testing on could be on the test. Like, that's the whole point of tests. I'm teaching you this material. Are you learning it? That's the point of a test, right? And I never really understood that or cared, partially because school isn't really set up that way. It would require way more work to teach that, as opposed to just teaching material, like teaching understanding and learning material on top of teaching the material itself is not really the school's responsibility. That's your responsibility to learn that. And I don't know if I just, like, if people tried to teach me that and I was kicking against the pricks, to borrow a phrase, or what the deal was, but I never really wanted to do that. I always just wanted to do the minimum that I possibly could to get by, and then just roll forward and not deal with anything else. Like, I didn't really want to have to deal with any other pieces of anything, because I just wanted it to be, let me just do my thing. Let me just, minimum. I need to look at this information, go over the study guide. If I can answer the questions on the study guide perfectly, I'll get enough of the questions right on the test to pass the class. No big deal, right? Whereas if I had espoused a mentality, a 100% mentality, I think that's the key. In fact, I think I've nailed it. On the piano, in the ring, in a test, if you espouse a 100% mentality where when I get in that ring, when I get into that test, when I perform that piece, I will perform it perfectly. It's not a question. I'm not nervous going into it whether I'll perform the way that I'm supposed to, because if I take it the mentality that when I perform, I will perform it at 100% perfection, it changes completely the activities that you do while you're practicing for it. So if I know that my goal with playing a piece is to perform it perfectly, I will perform it to myself for a week before the actual performance. And my goal in training, in practicing, will be, I want to be able to play this song perfectly every time I play it for at least a week before the performance, so that there's no doubt in my mind that I can play it perfectly and that I will play it perfectly. Because if I've played it for a week perfectly, then there's no reason why that, why that performance, the last performance, it's the same as the other 15 or 20 or however many I can perform in that week. So it's about practicing, training, so that when I perform, the performance is like another one of the training sessions. But it's even easier because, it's not like practice for 3 hours. It's perform for 3 minutes and then done. And same thing in a test. Like if you study with the end goal in mind that you're going to get 100% on the test, you necessarily have to learn all of the material in the test, because all the material that was covered that could have been covered that you might have missed, everything, which means you have to learn the content. You have to learn it, not just be able to recite it. You have to know it, because the only way you can guarantee 100% is if you know the material perfectly inside. And then it's just, oh, this is the question? Boom, I know. Because it's part of me. It's not, I'm trying to remember what it is. It's, no, I know what it is. Because I studied it. Because I've made it part of me. And I think the same thing is true, and interesting that I end up talking about training and fighting, because I think that's the most visceral example of this. Where when you train for something with the goal in mind and with the what's the word I'm looking for? The objective in mind, that the performance or the actual fight will be perfect. You'll do nothing wrong. You'll slip every punch. You'll land every single one of your techniques. You'll know everything that's supposed to happen. You'll understand. You'll be able to foresee what the other person's going to do. You train for a much more difficult opponent than you're actually going to face. Because you can't just, even if you were to spar with the guy you're fighting for 6 weeks beforehand, and you really understand their movement and you really understand the way that they do things, there's still the chance that somehow on the side they will have gotten better between the last time you spar with them and the actual performance, the actual fight. And so you can't really account for everything. But if you are constantly and consistently putting yourself up against opponents that are bigger, stronger, tougher, more hard-headed, more experienced, more technical than you are, and than your opponent's going to be, then when you step into the ring with your actual opponent, it'll be like a Thursday, like a low intensity day, like your recovery day, right? So in the same way that I think shifted for me. I mean, there was a couple of, like I said in that video, there were a couple of things, but running that hill made me realize that even my training for the fights that I actually took, I was like, let me train so that I can master this training session. Like I'm pretty good at pads, or I got pretty good at pads, meaning I'm pretty good at conserving my energy so that I can give a good pad round so that I can do everything. When I think the real point is, your everything should be like, you should burn yourself to nothing. Joe Schilling, who's a professional kickboxer, he posted on his Instagram, and I mentioned this in the video, posted on his Instagram that he, one time he was training for a fight, and you see him doing some cardio, and then he throws up because he's going so hard. Like it's not true that when you get to a certain level, you don't have to work as hard. The effort is always 100%. The only thing that changes is your output. And so naturally, and this never really clicked for me, I don't think, but naturally, your effort should be at 100%. And then the output that you become capable of should be far beyond what you're actually expected to produce the night of the fight. So you should basically prepare for world championship level fights, and put in that amount of work. I mean, we're talking like, in fact, I love this because there's so much more to training for a fight than just like sparring or doing pad sessions or hitting the bag, right? There's cardio, there's strength training, there's everything. You have to practice, you have to train for something that's much worse, for perfection, right? You have to train beyond what you think you're going to need in order to be where you need to be. So just like for me to perform adequately, and that's the funny thing is, for me to perform adequately on the piano in front of professional musicians, I have to play it perfectly. That's like the starting level. There's no room for, oh, he made a mistake or the fingering was wrong. Because this is a funny thing. When you get into professional music, some of you may know this, but you can hear wrong fingering. If I play a Bach piece and the fingering is wrong in the right hand, somebody that knows that song and that piece, and most people do, will hear that you played the fingering wrong, and that's like immediate disqualification. The standard is perfection, and then that's the base level standard. Like you can't come in and expect to perform with those people unless you can get yourself to a certain base level, which is that, like, no, stylistically or technically on the piano, every note has to be perfect. The timing has to be perfect. Beyond that is where you get into the difference between the famous professional musicians and the studio musician. But I think the interesting parallel is that with fighting, there's just so much that you just have to put yourself through so much worse than you could ever even think you would put yourself through in the ring. Not because your trainer told you to, not because it's conventional wisdom, but because when you get into the ring, it needs to not be as bad. It can't be the worst. It can't be the hardest thing, the hardest part of your training camp. The fight can't be. Just like the performance of the piano piece can't be the most nerve-wracking or the hardest part of the actual thing. Of course, there's things you can't replicate about a live performance, right? The crowd, the lights, the stage, you being by yourself, the nerves, right? That's something else. But as far as the actual performance, the actual playing the notes, the actual fight, the actual test, you should have already done the work for that, right? That's not something that really requires that you. That's not something that you should really have to even think about. And the funny thing is, I've got the performance thing in the bag. Like, I know how to shut out the audience. In fact, I like being in front of people. So like playing the piano in front of people is not an issue. It's the practicing part. It's getting it perfect. So if I have any nerves around performing for somebody, it's because I know that I have not practiced something to perfection. In fact, just, I don't know, over Christmas, so like a month ago, I lied before when I said I hadn't played the piano in 6 months, because I did practice and play for this thing. Anyway, my sister had a Christmas program at her church, and I stepped in to help play. I accompanied a violinist, and the music is beautiful. It's a great arrangement. The violin is beautiful, and we worked on it, and we got it to the point where it was good, and the performance went great. But I knew going into the performance that it was possible that I could screw something up, and it was just because I hadn't practiced it enough. Now, I don't know that I needed to practice that. That's not an example of something that needs to be perfect, right? But at the end of the day, what does need to be perfect, right? So if I had done enough work beforehand to know that performance would be perfect, there are a lot of nerves that I wouldn't have had. Like, I was actually nervous to perform that because I knew that there was a possibility that I could play some of the notes wrong, which bothered me. But if I had just practiced to the point where I knew that I was going to play it perfect, then that wouldn't have been an issue. And I think that's the case across the board. Like these fights in Arizona last year, going into them, I was like, I know that I'm bigger, taller. I know that I've done a lot of work with my cardio and the conditioning, but still, I didn't know if I was going to win. And I think that's the wrong mentality. And it just comes down to the fact that I didn't work hard enough in training. I worked hard in training. Don't get me wrong. I worked hard in training and I put the hours in, but I feel like my mind I didn't have the right mentality. So the training was not, I'm training for something worse than it's going to be there. I was just training to win the training, like to beat whatever I was trying to do right then, as opposed to constantly having the end goal in mind. And I think, we could dive into why that is and where some of that underlying feeling of needing to do things that way comes from. But I think in general, The key is just that I never really took anything seriously enough to commit to it at that level. And so, that's something for me that's definitely going to change. I think that as we move forward, being able to commit to things and commit to perfection, like committing to perfection, I think is something that I've shied away from, mostly just because I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to come short of it. Because that's like, it's like disappointing to everybody, myself included. And so, it's just interesting that whole mindset, that whole, idea of, how those pieces, it's funny, those pieces of my life coming together and teaching me a lesson that I probably should have learned a long time ago, but didn't. I just think about how much different my life could potentially have been if I had learned this lesson in high school and gotten straight A's, because there is no reason why I shouldn't have got straight A's. Like, I was in honors classes. I'm a smart dude. Like, I can learn things. I just didn't apply myself, and I think part of it is because I was okay. In my mind, the cost of really putting in the work to learn something was not worth the payout of getting the grade. And I think that's just short-sighted, because all I saw was what was right in front of me. And all I was, in fact, this has been a very transformative experience. I'll pay you all for your counseling bill later, because me just talking to nobody, well, nobody's watching, but me just talking to the camera, I think has helped me uncover a lot of these things. But I think part of the issue is because I was not able, I've never really been able to see beyond the next hour or the next 20 minutes, the next day. Everything is about how do I survive this? How do I survive what I'm going through right now? But I've never really been good at seeing tomorrow, like future me, like what is my choice now going to affect tomorrow? And recently, that's sort of changed a little bit for work. There's been some situations where it crystallized for me that if I didn't do something in a certain moment, that moving on to later in that week, it would cause problems. And so that's started to be, I think this has all been a gradual shift, and where I'm starting to at least see that that's an issue. But part of the thing that I've been trying to come to grips with and really understand about myself is what is the future me, and how can the present me, best serve the future me? Because I've made a lot of choices over the last 5-6 years that past me was happy about, that present me is not happy about. And I can't do anything about it. They're choices that I made, and I'm locked into the consequences of those choices. And so it's interesting, as you get later in life. I mean, I'm 31. This is, am I 31? I'm 30. I don't actually know how old I am. It's 2018 now, so that means I'll be 32. Yes, I'm 31. Wow, that was very embarrassing. It's interesting that this is coming to me so late in life, but I'm glad that it's coming at all, because I feel young still. I feel like I have my whole life ahead of me, and it changes, I think, my outlook and really the way that I'm moving forward with life. So anyway, I just wanted to point some things out. I'm done with talking about that. I pointed a couple of things out. You may have seen this. For those that are just listening to the audio, you won't know this, but I'm pointing at, I have this little tattoo on my arm, my forearm. I actually have one that's faded here. You can't really see it. And one that's fading here. And then there's one on my elbow here. They're not real tattoos. You can tell because they're fading. That's mostly for my mother. She needs to know that they're not real tattoos. Not to say that I would never get real tattoos, but I actually kind of like, speaking of this whole thing, I kind of like the fact that there's no real long-term commitment to this. Like, I can have ink that stays for about a week and a half, but then it goes away. Like this one here, I put this one on like 3 weeks ago, and it's almost totally gone. You can see there. Yeah, you can't even see anything. Anyway, so I've got these, and you can see also that since the last time I recorded one of these, again, people that listen to the audio won't know this, but I've grown the beard out quite a bit. I'm going to let it grow. It'd be epic and grand. Anyway, I think, that's been a thought that's been on my mind. This is kind of this theme that happens in my life. I'll go through I'll think of, there'll be like this thing that's gnawing at my brain, and I'll make a video and I'll do a blog post, and then I'll make an episode here and just kind of talk through it. And it's interesting because I get deeper to some of these pieces, some of the things that I'm really concerned about, and I can move forward on that. So anyway, I'm glad to be back. Podcasting is super fun, and I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to do this live thing because it actually, the funny thing is, doing it live this way makes my job of the post-production of this whole thing a lot simpler because the video's done, so that just stays online. I don't actually have to deal with the file of the video. The audio gets recorded to my desktop, and I can just make sure that there's no, if I need to do any post-production on that, which I shouldn't, I can just upload that straight into my podcast system, and that gets published out, and then everything's fine. I don't have to worry about it. So that's exciting. But anyway, I hope that you'll, if anybody out there is watching or paying attention, that you'll listen. I also have a website that I put together, brettwardjames.com. It's just my blog right now. There will be some cool things put up there shortly, but I'm kind of just getting back into this idea of putting thoughts out there, because it's not like I stopped having them. I just settled down a bit, and I've been doing the home life thing a little bit. One of these times I'll have Sue actually on the podcast. I think I've convinced her that she needs to join the podcast and actually be part of it. But there's a lot of stories and things that we could tell, from the past year and a half that would be a lot of fun. So anyway, super excited to be back at it, back doing the podcast thing. Let's see if I can remember the outro that I used to do before. I'll play you guys out and we'll be good. Peace.